Spring training exhibition games will begin tomorrow for the Mets. So barring any last-minute additions, the Mets roster seems to be pretty much set. Whether we like that or not, the storylines will continue to flow going into spring training. So today we're going position by position to discuss every storyline from positional locks, positional debates, the impact of our prospects, internal gems that could make an impact during the season, along with the glaring factor of the World Baseball Classic, which loads of Mets players are expected to participate in. So let's get into it. Here is our official full guide of everything you need to know going into 2023 Mets spring training. The Mets are looking to be championship contenders. Just like last year, they're looking to win now. And all of those expectations begin in spring training.
There's not a lot of position battles because, again, we pretty much know what most of the team looks like. But, there are, obviously, with the WBC, we get to see more of the kids. With, like you said, about half the Mets roster going away. You're nice to see some of the young guys in the minor league system who maybe you see this year, maybe you see in 3 years. Hell, maybe you never see them. They just turn into Matthew Allen. Who knows?
Yeah, like I just said, there isn't really many position battles. It's not, who's trying to win the first base job or who's trying to win the second base job. But a lot of it is going to determine, who is going to be the depth that we always talk about so much, that if there are injuries, if there are guys struggling, who are going to be those guys to get called up and actually stay on the roster throughout the course of the season, even if it's in the minor leagues. There's plenty of guys on here who are non-roster invites, who are not on the 40-man roster, who are just trying to get a job, just trying to stay in the organization. So that's going to be the really important thing to watch for this particular spring training.
So let's just start off with the catcher position. Definitely a lot of things glaring with this whole situation. We all know that the new addition of Omar Narvaez, he will most likely be expected to play in the WBC. We also know that the relationship that has been growing between him and our top prospect, Francisco Alvarez, where he has been mentoring him. We also have the 100% confidence of Alvarez saying that he's going to be on the opening day roster. We have some things where Francisco Alvarez needs to improve his English for communication, and then there's also another kind of a blurb where I'm kind of curious to see how that does apply with Kodai Senga, where these are two guys who are trying to learn the English language at the same time. We'll see how that communication does as well. Tomas Nido's impact in playing time with Omar Narvaez looking to be the top catcher on this team so far. The showcase of Kevin Parada. There's also some other catchers, Michael Perez, who we re-signed to a minor league deal, most likely will start in AAA. Hayden Senger, Nick Mayer will also be here, but there's nothing really too special to talk about them. But it does become quite a story when it's revolving around a top prospect who, we don't know what his role is going to be just yet, but we're definitely going to see him featured a lot.
Yeah, obviously with Narvaez leaving for the WBC, they did report early, and they've been working with each other as soon as they got, even in a couple days, even before pitchers and catchers were supposed to report. You saw them already working together, working on framing, working on blocking, all of the tools of a catcher. And then you have Nido and Alvarez pretty much starting catching throughout spring training to see. That's kind of the battle. Is Nido has the defensive edge, but you have the bat of Alvarez that is tempting. But again, we all expect him to be in AAA to start the season. But again, he has the confidence. And I think if he does have that kind of Barry Bonds spring, it's going to be kind of hard to see why not. Especially if Tomas Nido is Tomas Nido and can't hit his weight. But, again, they did get by out his arbitration years, but who knows. But with Nido, and then you got Perez, it'd be cool to see Parada. Because again, I was taking with the first pick. He barely got a couple of ABs in St. Lucie, so a couple games, so it'd be cool to see him get a bunch of ABs, obviously with Narvaez gone. So again, it's a good group. It's a lot of catchers, some better than others. Obviously, when you got one of the best prospects in baseball at a position, it's pretty good. And then, you've got two big league catchers. One we'll see from day one. The other we'll see, a couple weeks later. So, again, it's a solid group. It's the catching position. It's a very weak position overall in the game, and the Mets have a pretty decent glut of them.
I think it pretty much just relies on the fact that if Alvarez has a Pete Alonso 2019 spring training where he's not expected to be on the roster and expected to start in AAA, that's the only way that I see him starting on the opening day roster. But as for that, it's going to be extremely fun to see a lot of these young guys get their reps on television, because some people don't watch minor league baseball religiously like me and Andrew do.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, even if Alvarez does have the 2019 P. Alonso spring training, there's a lot more that goes into it for his particular position, because Alonso, I mean, whether his defense was great or not, didn't matter. First baseman, he hits, he plays. I think even if Alvarez does hit really well in spring training, if his defense isn't great, I still could see a scenario where he still ends up to start off in the minor leagues to begin the major league season. The guy I'm really curious to see, like answer, is Kevin Parada. I'm curious to see, how do they split his time? Does Parada only catch in spring training? Do they experiment with him going to some other positions? Because, I mean, you only have one catch position. How do you get Alvarez and Parada in the lineup? So I'm really curious to see how they balance that and how both those guys perform.
Parada is someone who you'll see probably some limited appearances. It's kind of like how the first time in 2021 when all of our top guys were featured, but the first-year guys weren't really being featured that much. I mean, we saw a little bit of Beatty. We saw a little bit of Vientos. We saw like a tiny bit of Pete Crow Armstrong when he was here, but we didn't see much of Francisco Alvarez. We didn't see really much of the other younger top prospects. They were there, but we just didn't really see them play as much. So then we get to the first base position, and I think this one is pretty much settled. We know who our first baseman is, but he will be playing for Team USA in the WBC again, and he probably will be there for a while because that team's pretty good, not going to lie. Another thing we can talk about first base, the possible reps for maybe Mark Vientos as well. That's another thing. We could see that in spring training because he's not the best at third base, and maybe he does do something at the other corner. Another thing I also want to bring up is Eduardo Escobar. He did play a little bit of first base in Milwaukee when he was traded there. I do want to see if they try to do this. I doubt they do, but we know that Eduardo Escobar is a little bit older. If the DH position is a little bit weaker during the season down the line, like we're kind of expecting it to be, if they want to put the extra bats in the lineup, riding the hot hand, we know that Eduardo Escobar can be hot at times. So if he's hot, I wouldn't mind seeing some reps at first base. I think they should consider doing.
I think this is actually a pretty big spring training for Daniel Vogelbach, because when he first arrived with the Mets, I mean, we all were excited, like, oh, a new bat, bang behind Alonso, putting up really good numbers, whatever you want to talk about, except home runs. But on that, he was giving you production, which was a step in the right direction from what we were previously getting at that DH spot. Then, as we know, the Philadelphia game, he pulls the hamstring, wasn't really the same guy. So I wonder that now, having the whole offseason to rest up, come back healthy, I wonder if we are going to see that Vogelbach that was closer to the one the Mets got when they first acquired him. So I think this is going to be really important for Vogelbach to really, even though he's listed as a first baseman, he's going to be the DH. But still, overall, this is an important spring training for him. Obviously, same goes for Darren Ruff. Is he going to get some time at first base with Alonso not there? Maybe. He's probably also DHing. But again, like we said with the catcher position, if you want all these guys to get playing time, they can't all be the DH at the same time. So, I mean, are they going to experiment with putting Ruff in the outfield again? It didn't look pretty when they did at the end of the season, but, we'll see what they do. I think Vientos is the big one because he's still just trying to find a role, some kind of role. We know it won't be at third base. Again, it's hard to be a first baseman when Pete Alonso is there, and even though Pete does well at DH, he doesn't love DHing. So that's always something to consider. He has that big contract potential extension looming over his head. So you got to give Pete Alonso what he wants. So you're really limited to pretty much just DH for, like we've said a million times, so many guys. So even though they're all listed as first baseman, they'll only play just because Pete's not there.
I want to see Beatty at first because I want to see Brett Beatty kind of like Will Myers was with him, where I want him to play first, he can play third, he can play the corner. You see Vientos get a bunch. I think Vientos should be the everyday first baseman majority of the time in spring. But I want to see Beatty over there. We've heard the defensive struggles. Big guy to play for. He's kind of like perfectly fit to be a first baseman. And obviously with Ruff and Vogelbach, Ruff will play, I guess, if Pete, gets a day off. But he's kind of fighting for a spot. Because again, let's say Vientos has a crazy spring and Darren Ruff continues to be Darren Ruff. We have him penciled in, but again, if Vientos hits like 12 homers in spring training, I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, that's our left-handed DH. If there's a world where Mark Vientos takes that job, Darren Ruff gets DFA'd, and we'll see. And I think that's what we want.
Once Pete Alonso isn't here, I think, again, like we've said, letting the young guys play, Mark Vientos putting him at first base. He's a lanky guy, doesn't really move much, doesn't have the best range, he's just not really that good of a overall defender. It's just another place where you can put one of these plethora of DHs that you have right now. And I think the most value you can get out of him defensively, offensively, we'll see what he does. He played a lot of first base in AAA. He played a lot of third base in AAA. And then that brings us to second base. One thing that I really want to see is how long of the leash Jeff McNeil is going to be with positional flexibility. Jeff McNeil could play the corners if they need him to. We all know that Jeff McNeil coming into a 31-year-old season. I want to see what the leash is going to be for Jeff McNeil, who's getting paid a lot more, who is very valuable to this lineup for the positional flexibility you get from that. We also have the utilization of Luis Guillorme. I don't know if he'll be playing more third base or second base. Current health and the role of Danny Mendick as well. We don't know what's going to happen with him. We saw him taking some batting practice after tearing his ACL. Jose Peraza, he's back, the legend himself. Jonathan Arise, who was in the minor league version of the Rule 5 draft. The Mets picked him up this year.
So getting back to old Jeffrey McNeil, we know he's got the second base position locked down. He's going to WBC as well. So it's going to be those other guys playing. I think Jose Peraza is someone I'm keeping an eye on because at least he did have, he was a really good pinch hitter. I mean, that was the one thing that he had going for him. And he played a decent second base. Peraza is a guy who's a veteran and he's playing for a job. I'm sure Peraza would like to be a part of this team. And I'll tell you what, I feel like I'd rather have Jose Peraza than Darren Ruff. At least Peraza could move around the field a little bit. Meanwhile, we got all these fat guys that just stand there and do a whole bunch of nothing. So if Jose Peraza has a decent spring training, he's someone to have to at least consider until Danny Mendick is fully healthy, because you can't have Luis Guillorme as your only guy who could play the infield on the bench. Guillorme, we know he's going to be here on the roster in some capacity, whatever position that is. Like Carson, probably will be mostly shortstop because these other older guys, they're not really going to be playing shortstop. Guillorme will. So I am curious to see, how they're going to just allocate the playing time with so many guys out. Like, somebody's got to play. So we imagine we'll see those guys. Ronnie Mauricio, will he play any second? I doubt it. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing them at least experiment with it, but I think he'll be most likely on the left side of
Danny Mendick is the biggest question mark. If he's healthy, he could be an intriguing guy that can play the outfield, infield, like that kind of guy we've been crying the Mets to get. But obviously him coming off a torn ACL, we'll see if he's ready.
Let me ask this question here. We have a lot of young talent in the infield, such as Mauricio or Beatty, or if Vientos does play there. Let's say like you have one veteran out there, Jeff McNeil, Luis Guillorme. Do you want Eduardo Escobar there? Is there one particular guy that you think that would connect the best with those young prospects?
If I'm any of these middle infielders, I'm hanging around Guillorme as much as possible. That's what he does. Like, he's always at the right spot. So if we're just talking strictly defense, not about the bat, if I'm Mauricio, I'm hanging around Luis Guillorme and trying to learn as many little things that he does, because you've seen either if it's throwing or picking, he's just good at everything. Second best overall defender on the team. Besides, the shortstop we have, pretty damn good. Watch those two guys. That would be my thing. If I'm a shortstop or a second baseman, I'm taking in as much information and just watching guys like Lindor and Guillorme, because those are two of the best in the game at what they do. So, yes, Eduardo Escobar is a nice teammate. Probably a nice guy. But if I'm looking for strictly defense, I'm hanging around and I'm just watching Lindor and I'm watching Guillorme.
I personally think this is a lot bigger of a storyline than people think it is because of the non-shift now. It's going to be definitely an adjustment to look at. And I think that, whether you're looking at it from who has the best range or not, who has the best hands or not, I mean, Guillorme is definitely somebody up there. Jeff McNeil is also somebody that you can follow around as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that Guillorme, the thing that he does really well is he just has great reflexes. I mean, when you think about him catching the bat and like all the other, like I said, the weird things he does, like you can't really teach that. It's something you kind of have or you don't. So there's only one Luis Guillorme in that aspect. One of the guys actually, and this is non-biased, but with McNeil, he wasn't always like a great defender at second base. I think this past season was where we saw the biggest strides, the biggest improvements. So if I'm a young player, I'm going to Jeff and being, well, what were some of the things that you did that you were able to make this improvement? Because Guillorme always been a great defender. Escobar, he's always been okay. But Jeff, to actually go from okay to good, I'd be kind of curious in that regard. And the thing about Escobar is that we already see online, he's already talking to these young guys. He's already all over these young guys, messing around with them, talking to them, mentoring them, because that's what Escobar loves to do. He did that last season when he went to the other field and talked to them. So he's going to do that regardless. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm going to tell you to go watch him or go mentor these guys. Like, it's just what he does. So Escobar is going to be around them regardless. But I'm just curious to see, what did Jeff do to become we thought he could have at least been a finalist for a Gold Glove, which is not something that we predicted going into the season. So I just want to know, how can you improve? Because Guillorme, he's just a weird guy. Like, you can't be Guillorme. There's only one of him.
So then that brings us to third base. And off the top of my head, I can tell this right now, I think it's Brett Beatty's job to lose. Whether it's the possibilities of him making the opening day roster or what the playing time is going to be during the regular season, I think that he's going to obviously have the main spotlight on him. The trust of Mark Vientos at third base. Do they actually trust him there? We'll see if they do. Ronnie Mauricio, does he get some reps there? How did they actually do split this time? Because there is quite a lot of possibilities to put at third base during spring training. I'm hoping that it doesn't just become one of these man crush situations that Buck had with Luis Guillorme, and he gives the reins to some of the kids.
As the most unbiased one here, it needs to be Beatty's job to lose going into the spring, because we know what Eduardo Escobar is. But he's a vet you can have on the bench, and what he should be using the role is the role that the Brewers used him in. Play everywhere. Go play some first base. Maybe play some second base. Make him be, with Guillorme, the other utility guy, because you have one of the best third base prospects in the game who has the upside that Escobar doesn't have. Was his defense great when we saw him last year? No, it was not. Do I think it will improve? Yes. I would like to see Ronnie play some third. Again, I'm not the highest on Ronnie, but I do think you should see some reps, and especially with Escobar going. I don't want to see Vientos play third. Again, I think he needs to be a first baseman, but again, keep the utility. Let him get a game or two a week at third base. It should be Brett, and then the Brett replacement should be Mauricio. I think that could be like how we see a tag team of all right, who starts, who's usually always after him. I wouldn't mind seeing a Beatty start and then Mauricio coming in after the fifth inning, or whatever, how many ABs the guys get in the game. I need to start using some of these cost controllable play pieces on this team. And if Beatty has a great spring, there should not be any doubt of who needs to be the opening day third base.
Mauricio is the guy that I have my eye on, because similar to Vientos, they have to figure out what is Mauricio's role going to be. We've talked about a lot of times, should you trade him? Could you trade him? Because the thing about Ryan Mauricio is that he was brought up as a shortstop. He will not be a shortstop for the New York Mets. We know Francisco Lindor is going to be here for a long time. So if you're going to have him on your team, you got to find somewhere to play him. So in all likelihood, third base would be that position. So I do want to see Mauricio get a good amount of reps at third base. We've talked about with Beatty, maybe put him in left a little bit, put him in first base a little bit, at third base a little bit. But as far as whose job is it going to be, it's supposed to be Brett Beatty's, because this Rhino for a long time has been telling me about how Brett Beatty's this, Brett Beatty's that. He's going to be the guy, I promise. He's talked them all up. And then they signed Escobar to be a placeholder until the generational Brett Beatty is ready. One of the best prospects at third base in the whole game. Like I've said, show me. Let me see it. Win the job. Go do it. Escobar won't be here. He'll be at the WBC. It's all for you to, like I said, it's your job to lose. So I want to see Brett Beatty have the power. I want to see him go the opposite field. I don't want to see him kill all the bugs in Florida, hitting all those ground balls. I want to see this Brett Beatty, who's, the next Freddie Freeman, the next Christian Yelich, and all these other crazy comparisons that he's got. Let me see it. So that's who's the most pressure on him. It's time to step up, kid.
Third base definitely has a full house. This is definitely going to be one of the main positions to watch. Now there's shortstop. Well, that guy Francisco Lindor is going to be here for about 9 more years, so he's pretty much a lock. Now, as Lindor does get closer to his 30s, as he does get older, the likelihood of him playing 150-plus games a year will slim down. We know it eventually will. But like we said with Luis Guillorme being like the only backup shortstop or only guy that can move around the entire infield in any pinch, it could be a possibility where with Francisco Lindor in the WBC, Luis Guillorme, Danny Mendick, maybe even Ronnie Mauricio, maybe Eduardo Escobar, they look to see if he can be the backup shortstop. You can definitely put an eye on it, obviously, because of the workload that Francisco Lindor had last year.
The biggest guy to watch shortstop is Ronnie, because like you said, again, we'll see how far Puerto Rico goes, but then there's a chance Lindor's gone for 3 to 4 weeks, and hey, there's most of the month. There you go, Ronnie, play shortstop. Let's see. People have put, you had a great winter league, and everyone was calling you the next Mike Trout because you won MVP in the Dominican League. Maybe instead of Devin Marrero, it'll be Ronnie Mauricio in case of an emergency shortstop this year. So for Buck to get his eyes on Mauricio, and he'll probably play a lot because, like I said, Lindor's going to be gone, and the only guy ahead of him on the depth chart is probably Guillorme. Again, I think Guillorme playing every day, and then Mauricio, those two guys being tag team at short, probably is something to watch out for, especially if McNeil's going the WBC. So in a case of emergency, Mauricio's pretty damn close to a call, especially if Lindor were to go down for a long period of time. He's kind of the only other shortstop on the roster. Again, Jose Peraza is again another guy who could play shortstop, but again,
I think something that people forget about Jose Peraza in the sense of that is that he's only 28 years old. He's actually not as old as people think he is. So he could play shortstop. It's going to be something to keep your eye on. Again, we're not guaranteeing that Lindor is going to get hurt. We're not guaranteeing that he's going to be fully healthy. It would be nice to, rest him once, maybe.
Yeah, because the thing is that you never know when you're going to be in California and you don't know how to close a door. So, anything could happen at any given time, especially when you are the New York Mets. But because of the lack of depth and not really a lot of quality options, Lindor played through that and did not take days off. Even if Buck Showalter was like, Francisco, going to give you a day off, he's like, no, I'm going to play. But, a guy can only take so much. So you do want to be prepared, and that's why it's important for, like we said, Mauricio to get those reps. We imagine the first guy was Guillorme, but, like we've said a million times, if Guillorme got hurt as well, you're in trouble. Now they have Danny Mendick, but again, it's like, what do you expect offensively? Like, okay, the guy can play the position. If the ball's hit to him, he could catch it and throw it to the base. But with Francisco Lindor, you're talking about a guy who has multiple tools, who could actually hit. He could run. He does extra things. And it's like, you want that in your backups as well, to the point where if you needed somebody else to start, they could give you some offensive production or not an automatic out. So that's something the Mets don't really have when you go past Guillorme. These other guys, it's like you're really just hoping for the best because you don't expect much. So this is big for Mauricio, even though he's still on the younger side. Somebody's got to step up because it doesn't look like the Mets are going to sign any other infielders. There's not many left on the market. So this is who you have. So it's going to have to come from within. One of these guys to have to step up. We'll see who gets the most playing time. Once Lindor's in WBC, I imagine it'll be mostly Guillorme. Then you see Mauricio, maybe Peraza a little bit, but that's probably going to be the pecking order going forward.
Let's move to the outfield. Tons of stuff to talk about, from left to center to right. Mark Canha, invisible regression concerns right now, nobody really knows. The possible reps of Brett Beatty in left field. There's the ideal role, playing time of Tommy Pham. Nimmo is not going to be playing in the WBC. He's going to be here. We know that Nimmo has his injury concerns. A backup center fielder options, they should be showcased. There's some non-roster invites. Abraham Almonte, Lorenzo Cedrola, Tim LaCastro. I don't think Khalil Lee will be playing center field. Most likely will be playing the corners. I don't know why he's even here, to be honest. The showcase of top outfield prospect Alex Ramirez, who I am extremely excited about. I think that he'll get some reps in center field. I hope he gets reps in right field as well, because I think he's a little bit more of a right fielder. You move over to right field, you have the health status of Starling Marte, who you haven't really seen much about since camp began. And then that opens up the fringe opportunity of DJ Stewart, who is primarily a right fielder. Lots of space in a baseball outfield, and it's definitely crowded during spring training.
Center, got the $162 million man. Do we see a continued progress from him? Maybe we see a power surge. And again, Marte with the question mark. And then Canha and Pham probably will be a platoon in left with, depending on how Mark does. And Marte, again, being the biggest question mark. Neil out probably both corners, like we said earlier. He's kind of that fifth outfielder after Tommy Pham. And then again, the guys who are going to be in Syracuse, DJ Stewart, power bat. We'll see if he has kind of that Daniel Polka as spring training. Like, oh, okay, who's this guy? Okay, he's got a little bit of pop. Okay. Amante has had some decent success in the big leagues, having another corner outfielder. Again, it's better than having guys like Travis Jankowski because at least they can hit a baseball. And then Tim LeCastro, being the new Travis Jankowski, just being very fast. Nimmo were to get hurt. Is Mark Canha the backup center fielder? Is that something we'll see in spring training? We saw it last year. Again, it's a core. It has 4 big leaguers, and then you pray to God nobody gets hurt. But then with the guys the Mets have, it's going to be. But at least their depth in Syracuse is better than what they had last year.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely is, as far as depth is concerned, probably the biggest concern, especially with Marte already not being healthy again. I mean, we talked about it. He even had some trouble in spring training last year, too. I mean, with the quad and all that. And then we know the closing of the season, he got hit in the hand. That wasn't his fault. But then he had the core surgery. I mean, that kind of came out of nowhere. So he's still recovering from that. He's a year older, so that makes even more likely to get injured again. And like we said, Mark Canha is a year older too. But the guy who really has got to step up is Tommy Pham. I mean, because he's the one guy who they signed to a major league contract who wasn't on the team last year. So he's the new bat, the guy who maybe is going to DH against lefties, who's maybe going to play the outfield a little bit. And he's a guy that I don't think very highly of. I don't expect much out of him because he's been someone who, and it happens as you get older, you get worse. And we've seen the regression in Tommy Pham. He's not the player he was in Tampa Bay a long time ago. So he's got to step up and be like, okay, well, if Marte is indeed hurt and Mark Canha has to move to center field, because that's what's going to happen. I mean, nobody else can play center field and hit. No one. I mean, they don't have anyone else that could do it. So if Mark Canha has to play center, I'm guessing Tommy Pham's in left field because I imagine that Buck Showalter will lean toward the veteran at first and then see what happens. Then maybe they could explore the Brett Beatty or the Jeff McNeil sliding over, something like that. But again, they're playing guys out of position, which is something that is a big pet peeve of mine, something I really don't like. But we knew these concerns. I mean, going into the offseason, they didn't do anything bad. So this is the team they have right now. This is the route that they're going to go. And it's concerning. But, I mean, at least Nimmo will be playing. That's good. I expect him to do his thing. He'll be the center fielder when healthy. But other than that, Mark Canha, you're older, more shift. Will there be some regression? Possibly. I mean, we saw him have a little bit of a power surge at one point in the season when he's in those home runs against Philadelphia and Miami. But in the playoffs, I didn't see any home runs. So, there's just a lot of question marks there. And we'll see if any of these guys can really stick. I mean, I don't expect much out of Almonte or Stewart or these other guys. I mean, Tim LeCastro, they are what they are, in my opinion. I mean, I hope they could be a spark. They could give them something. But the guys that they have on the Major League roster, those are going to be the guys playing the outfield, for this team going forward.
As stressful as I think the entire outfield is probably going to be, especially from depth-wise, health-wise, anything that you're looking at from it, I'm looking at the positives, and I'm usually not positive at all. I'm usually the worst person in the world. But Lorenzo Cedrola, we'll see what he can do. I think he's a decent bat-to-ball guy. I don't think he's going to help your power surge at all. Abraham Almonte, just kind of a plug-in type of guy if you need him in case there's injuries. And then, of course, we don't really know what the deal is with Khalil Lee, who I personally think shouldn't even be here. It's just pretty much a distraction with his personal life as of right now. The starting rotation. We may have 2 future Hall of Famers at the top of this rotation, but they will probably not get the big spotlight. It's going to be Kodai Senga. We're going to get our first look of the star from Japan that we signed for 5 years, $75 million. I'm very excited for this kid. We saw that he has reached 96 already with the new baseball, so that's pretty cool. Another conversation, of course, the number 5 starter debate, which we made a separate video about. Carrasco, McGill, Peterson. There's also Joey Lucchese's health and his role in whether it's the rotation or the bullpen or if he's in AAA. Other starting options who are pretty much depth options. Hopefully we can get some value out of them. Eliezer Hernandez, Jose Budo, Connor Gray, Josh Walker, Denyi Reyes, Eric Orzi, who has floated around AAA for the last few years. It's going to be a little bit important to showcase a lot of these depth arms because who knows, they may be making starts down the line during the season.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, on paper, it's a pretty good rotation. It's just a very old rotation. So, I mean, if these guys are healthy, they'll be fine. They'll be good. But, I mean, you're just concerned about who's going to fill that fifth spot. The key guy for me is Tylor McGill. I really would like to see a great spring training out of him because I just don't have much faith in Carrasco, whether it's Carrasco, his performance on the field, and just staying on the field in general. I don't have much faith either way. He's, like we've said with some of these other guys, he's a year older. We would really like to see a young guy step up because this rotation is old. I mean, Scherzer, Verlander, Hall of Famers, sure, All-Stars, all that wonderful accolade stuff, they're old. You know, I understand. I empathize with them. I sympathize with them as an older gentleman. But I really like to see one of those young guys have a big spring training so that they could really battle for that fifth spot because, you know, maybe the Mets were going to trade Carrasco at some point before, you know, spring training. They ended up not doing it. David Peterson, I still like him as more of the swingman role, more of a bullpen guy. I like him more in that aspect. So McGill is the guy I have my eye on. All these other guys, Budo, Gray, well, I don't expect much. Kodai Senga, I'm curious to see what he's going to do because he's replacing Chris Bassett, who was the Iron Man for the Mets when they had their injuries to the top of the rotation. So it's a big spring training for Senga, for Carrasco. Quintana, I mean, we'll see how he looks, having the big year at St. Louis, a bounce-back year. Hopefully he could build on that. So I'm curious to see how these new additions do.
I think we all want to know about the workloads that they're going to put on Verlander and Scherzer, of course. We saw last year, remember, Scherzer's first spring outing pushed to 5. Scherzer, little banged up last year. We all know that he's had his injuries and, you know, his little rough ups. Then he comes back, he's fine. We'll see what workload they give to them. Are they going to let them go on their own leash? Are they going to limit what they're going to do in spring training? I am very interested to see how they balance out Scherzer and Verlander. I hope we also get to see a Scherzer-Verlander game like we did last year with Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer. Definitely going to be fun on the pitching side, especially on the starting side. I'm hoping that they can find somewhat of one gem, at least one gem, who can pitch very well out of the other starting options, whether it is Eliezer Hernandez, who I don't really have that much confidence in, whether it is Connor Gray or Josh Walker, who is my dude.
I'm going to see Budo. Once he got back down to Syracuse, he won pitcher of the month in September. Like, yes, he had to start with Philadelphia. Then he went back and dominated. So I do want to see him because, again, he's probably the emergency. You know, once you put McGill and Peterson and, say, Verlander and Scherzer go down, that's the next man up is Jose Budo. That's probably after maybe Lucchesi. But, again, we'll see how this front office values Lucchesi, which is another interesting spring because when he was healthy at the end of the year, who could have helped the Mets out, they didn't call him. They left him in Syracuse. Is he going to be the swingman? Could he be in the Trevor Williams replacement role? That is kind of the big thing. Lucchesi is kind of what is he? And so I'm looking at Budo. I'm looking at Lucchesi.
But I'm interested to see with Jose Budo, too, because to be a solid starter, you need a fastball. And I don't know if his fastball is ready at all. And I think that, you know, maybe there is some improvement from that. But I think obviously he starts in AAA, but you know, again, I would love to see one of these gems come out of here that we know it can be somewhat reliable. Now we get to the bullpen. 4 locks right now, I think it's safe to say. Edwin Diaz signing his mega deal to be the highest paid reliever. David Robertson, Brooks Raley, and Adam Ottavino. Top of my head, first thing to say, this is the last chance for Drew Smith. Second lefty reliever argument as well. We talked about Matt Moore, but he just signed with the Angels. TJ McFarland, Zach Muckenhern is another one who was brought up, who most likely will start off in AAA. Projected probables, shall we say, that could be in the bullpen. Jeff Brigham, obviously. Bryce Montes de Oca, we'll see what goes on with him. John Curtis and his injury history. Steven Riding's another one with injury history. Sam Coonrod, who they did pick up as well. On the outside looking in, you have Jimmy Yacobonis. You have William Woods, who was DFA'd for the Ottavino signing. Steven Nagosic still hanging around with his Keith Hernandez stash. Zach Green, who was a Rule 5 selection. Grant Hartwig. Tommy Hunter, who is back on a minor league deal. Another guy you can put in there is Sean Reed Foley, but I don't think he's healthy right now.
This is a good one because these are some actual battles as people who are going to be on the opening day roster. Because like we talked about, we know those 4 locks, but then it gets very interesting. Like you said, I mean, Drew Smith is a massive spring for him because I know the Mets, they've given him so many opportunities, and he's going to get another one. So, I mean, we'll see if he makes the most of it. He had some success at the beginning of last season, but then, those big timely home runs that he just continues to give up is definitely a big concern in tight games. But John Curtis is someone I'm really looking forward to. I loved that move when they made it, giving him the 2-year deal. First year he recovers, second year he participates. So I'm curious to see what he could do. A guy came from Tampa Bay. You always got to love that. Joey Lucchesi, David Peterson battling it out. Are they going to battle for a second lefty role, a swingman role, maybe a bit of both? So I'd like to see a little bit of a battle there between Peterson and Lucchesi, see if either one of them has a big spring training. Bryce Montes de Yoka, out of all these other young arms, he has the most upside with the kind of break that he has on his pitches. So we'll see. I mean, this is one of the things the Mets did a lot in the offseason, was just getting a lot of young arms. So will any of these young arms stick big time? The Brighams of the world, the Zach Greens of the world, the Writings, maybe even William Woods, all these guys that they picked up throughout the course of the offseason. Can any of these guys stick? Because they're going to need at least, 4 more arms to make this opening day roster. So there's a lot of opportunities for these guys, and this is going to be an actual battle to who can make the team. So this is probably the one that's most intriguing, because these are guys that we talk so much about everyone else being a lock. There's a lot of uncertainty here, so this is going to be the biggest battle.
Drew Smith isn't guaranteed a spot, and let's say one of McGill or Peterson takes the long man. That leaves 3 spots in the bullpen for a bunch of guys to battle for. Obviously, me and Metsfan have been big on Deoka. They bring in a bunch of guys who throw 100 and have sliders. I'm going to talk about a guy who Metsfan brought up who is interesting because, again, I want my second lefty. TJ McFarland. Had a bad year last year, yes. The year before that, he was lights out with St. Louis. So it's not like, 5 years ago, this guy had a great... This is 2 years ago. He had a great year with St. Louis last year. Got roughed up a little bit. But I want a second lefty, and I don't want a guy like Lucchesi or Peterson where it's like, he's a second lefty, but he's really a starter. I want that kind of old-fashioned loogie like Jerry Blevins was or Josh Adjin, whoever. I got a lefty bat, Freddie Freeman, 2 man's out. I got an extra lefty in the pen. I want to use McFarland. And I think McFarland was the guy that get under that radar, kind of the same like Woods and Coonrod. They just brought in all these guys. He was the only vet they brought in on a minor league deal. Who I want to see that second lefty in the pen be an actual left-handed reliever, so you be able to use Rayleigh in other situations. But again, you got guys like Curtis and Coonrod who had one with the Phillies who broke him, who was good a couple years ago, and then the Phillies broke just because the Phillies break everything. If they have a nice thing, they break it. Could Jeremy Hefner bring him back to his 2021 form? Then Zach Green, again, I've said in the other video, I doubt he even makes the team because the Mets have a history of not keeping their Rule 5 picks, but he's brought in as of now, technically, he's got a 26-man roster spot. We'll see if he takes it. Obviously, Drew Smith. But then again, got Writings and Connor Gray, Grant Hartwig. There's plenty of young arms who throw 100. Hell, even Josh Walker's still hanging around there, but he's kind of that kind of Lucchesi Peterson where he's a starter. But, I think there's obviously 3 spots. I would love them to sign, I would love it to be, a lefty, a second lefty in there, not named Peterson and Lucchesi, but I think Yacobonis and Woods, there's plenty of guys battling for 4 spots, and you've got a good balance of young, unproven, couple of vets. And I think that's kind of what's best when you have a good group of everything, not just, you're crazy young or, you're crazy old. There's a good balance of both, and I think this should be a fun battle, and everyone has their own different thing, and we'll see. Let the battle begin, and let's see who wins them out.
There's definitely tons of things to watch during spring training. It is quite the marathon, and the pressure is kind of off the fans because these games don't count, but you're going to get to see a lot that goes on, especially with the World Baseball Classic.